Picture this, the best swimmers in the world battling it out in the 200 doggy paddle.
What?
While I attempt to forget the mental image of Michael Phelps swimming doggy paddle, I'm going to explain why we'll never get to see it. Over hundreds, even thousands of years, humans have perfected the art of swimming and figured out the fastest way to move through the water, leaving us with the 4 competitive strokes: butterfly, backstroke, breaststroke, and freestyle. But the strokes we see the pros doing today have come a long way from their humble and slow beginnings. Who invented butterfly? Why are there only 4 strokes? Can just anyone make up a stroke these days? Let's dive into the history of each swim stroke and how they came to be the official racing lineup for swimmers around the world. Long before the days of Michael Phelps, humans were getting after it in the water. Art in an Egyptian tomb from 2000 BC shows people swimming, and various Assyrian stone carvings show an early form of modern-day breaststroke. In Pompeii, mosaics show what looks like doggy paddle. And I know that's just art, so what about racing? The Japanese are credited with holding some of the first recorded swimming races, as early as 36 BC. And we can also assume that people swam for leisure, fun, and to keep cool on hot days. Needless to say, swimming has been part of the human experience for millennia, and as time went on, people began to figure out the fastest ways to move through the water. But what was the first official swim stroke? Take your guesses. It's breaststroke. In 1696, the art of swimming described an early form of head-up breaststroke. After the original French text was translated into English, this style of breaststroke became the most popular swim stroke in Europe for hundreds of years. Breaststroke looked relatively similar to what we see in pools today. A wide sweeping pull with the arms at the same time, followed by a frog kick with both legs simultaneously. Between strokes, swimmers would glide for a few beats before their next pull. Londoners began swimming competitively in earnest in the 1830s, and breaststroke dominated the lineup. Captain Matthew Webb of England took breaststroke to the next level in 1875. That year, he made the first recorded crossing of the English Channel, and he swam all 21 miles breaststroke. I can barely do a 200 breaststroke, so I'm impressed. Breaststroke was contested at the Olympic Games for the first time in 1904. Swimmers raced a 440-yard distance. As you can probably imagine, we are not still swimming the breaststroke of the 1800s. The stroke has evolved as swimmers refined their speed and discovered what works best in the water. Until 1987, swimmers had to keep their heads above water at all times while swimming breaststroke. That rule was eventually scrapped, and now swimmers can dunk their heads under between breaths. In 2005, World Aquatics allowed swimmers to take 1 dolphin kick during each pullout as well. Who knows? Maybe they'll change more about breaststroke in the future. We'll just have to wait and see. But let's rewind the clock a little bit, back to when breaststroke was in its infancy and Europeans couldn't get enough of it. Enter front crawl, or freestyle, whatever you call it. There's some evidence of an overarm stroke being used by ancient Greeks and Assyrians. And the use of front crawl-like strokes was also well documented among Native Americans, Pacific Islanders, and various African peoples. But due in part to Europe's aversion to swimming during the pandemic-ridden Dark Ages, freestyle sort of fell off their radar. These days, though, freestyle is the most popular stroke worldwide. It just took Europeans a while to fully accept freestyle into their repertoires. It all started with sidestroke. In the 1840s, swimmers started to adopt the English sidestroke instead of breaststroke. This stroke had a scissor kick and underwater arm recovery. It was said that when viewed from above, swimmers doing sidestroke looked like they were running. Eventually, this sidestroke was modified to include overwater recovery with 1 arm, based on a sidestroke technique used by Aboriginal Australians. For the next 40-some years, most races were done sidestroke. But one race in 1844 cemented freestyle in the back of swimmers' minds everywhere. That year, 2 Native Americans, Flying Gull and Tobacco of the Ojibwe tribe, traveled to London to compete in a swim race. When the race began, spectators were shocked at what they saw. Flying Gull and Tobacco's strokes were described as very un-European. One spectator said that the swimmers thrashed the water violently with their arms, like sails on a windmill, and beat downward with their feet, blowing with force and forming grotesque antics. The 2 newcomers left a lasting impression on swimmers across the pond. Flying Gull swam across the 130-foot pool, that's about 40 meters, in 30 seconds. But the Europeans weren't quite ready to let go of breaststroke as their go-to stroke, yet. On the sidelines, a few creative swimmers were still experimenting. In the 1870s, Englishman John Trudgeon debuted the Trudgeon stroke, which took sidestroke to the next level. Swimming with his chest flat and head out of the water, Trudgeon alternated swinging each arm over the water, adding a horizontal breaststroke kick to each stroke cycle. The stroke was very jerky, but was great over short distances. Around this time, some swimmers began experimenting with a variation of a scissor kick that would likely look similar to the flutter kick we see today. At the 1902 International Championships, Australian swimmer Richmond Cavell debuted a new take on the stroke based on what he saw the natives of the Solomon Islands doing. Dubbed the Australian crawl, this stroke was faster and more efficient than the trudgeon, due mostly to the up and down kick, which was probably similar to flutter kick. Cavell set a new world record with this stroke, swimming 100 yards in 58.4 seconds. Not bad. American Charles Daniels improved Cavell's stroke further, adding a 6-beat kick. That's 3 kicks for every arm stroke, and the American crawl was born. In the last century, freestyle has remained a dominant stroke in both racing and training. Sidestroke is still around too, but it's mostly used in life-saving and military training exercises. You won't see it at the Olympics. Europeans were definitely late to the party on freestyle, but they came around eventually, and these days Europeans are some of the most dominant freestyle swimmers. If they would have just taken the indigenous people's word for it instead of calling their strokes un-European, maybe they could have been even more dominant, but hindsight is 20/20, as they say. Before we move on, I do have to address the freestyle versus front crawl debate. Why is the 50 freestyle not called the 50 front crawl? Are freestyle and front crawl the same thing? It comes down to rules. Technically, in a freestyle race, you can swim any legal stroke, as long as you do that same stroke for the whole race. So you could swim breaststroke or butterfly in a 50 free and not get disqualified. Front crawl could be considered the official name for what most of us call freestyle, but it really depends on who you ask. Sound off in the comments if you have opinions, because I know you guys do. I am team freestyle, personally. Next up in our timeline, we have backstroke. Backstroke came onto the competition scene in the early 1900s. Men raced backstroke for the first time in the Olympic Games in 1900. For women, though, backstroke wasn't added to the racing lineup until 1924. Initially, swimmers did backstroke with a breaststroke kick and moved their arms at the same time. Eventually, the stroke evolved into what we see today. One arm stroke at a time, plus a flutter kick and lots of rotation from side to side. Based on the descriptions, I'd say that old school backstroke would probably look a lot like something a very tired swimmer would do to catch their breath after a tough workout. In the 1930s, Australian swimmers started experimenting with bending their arms during the underwater portion of the stroke. And voila, they swam faster. At the time, most swimmers swam with a straight arm catch and pull. Other athletes quickly adopted what the Aussies were doing, and bent arm pulls became the norm, not just in backstroke, but in all 4 competitive strokes. We call this early vertical forearm these days. Backstroke is the only stroke where swimmers start in the water instead of diving off the blocks. They hop in, place their feet on the wall, grab onto special handles, and explode off the wall backwards, entering in streamline. Over the years, backstroke rules have changed quite a bit. Until 1988, backstrokers could kick underwater as far as they wanted before they started swimming. But after American David Burkoff kicked a whopping 35 meters underwater on the first length of the 100 back at the 1988 Olympics, World Aquatics decided to impose a limit of just 10 meters underwater. These days, swimmers can go no more than 15 meters underwater before popping up, or they could get disqualified. In 1991, backstrokers were finally allowed to do flip turns when changing directions, which was a huge game changer. And in 2022, World Aquatics changed the backstroke rules yet again, allowing swimmers to fully submerge for the final 5 meters of their race. In the past, at least one part of the body had to be out of the water to avoid getting disqualified. Apparently, when Michael Phelps learned to swim at age 7, he only swam backstroke because he was afraid to put his head underwater. It is much easier to breathe in backstroke, so I can't fault him there. And last but not least, definitely not least, is butterfly. Now, if you've ever tried to swim butterfly, you know. It's arguably the toughest stroke of the 4. It uses every muscle in the body and can leave you totally gassed if you aren't in shape for it. So, what crazy person decided that, yep, butterfly should definitely exist? Not difficult at all. Totally fun and exciting. Well, I'll tell you in a sec. It turns out that butterfly got its start as a variation of breaststroke. In the 1930s, swimmers and coaches started experimenting with breaststroke technique and discovered that it was faster if the swimmer recovered their arms over the water instead of powering them forward underwater. In this early phase, swimmers still did the breaststroke frog kick, just their arms changed. In 1933, American swimmer Henry Myers was the first to use this new stroke technique in breaststroke competition, much to the officials' confusion. He argued that his stroke still fell within the breaststroke rules at the time, and so the butterfly trend was born. For the next 20 years or so, breaststrokers raced with a double arm overwater recovery and a breaststroke frog kick, but people continued to experiment with new ways to make breaststroke faster. In the mid-1930s, American swim coach David Armbruster added a dolphin kick to the overwater recovery. Game changer. And in 1945, according to the International Swimming Hall of Fame, Japanese swimmer Jiro Nagasawa was the first swimmer to use the butterfly arms and dolphin kick in competition. He set multiple butterfly world records during his career. And finally, in 1952, World Aquatics made butterfly an official stroke category. And in 1956, butterfly was contested for the first time in the Olympic Games. And we haven't looked back since. Imagine a world where we never never saw Michael Phelps swim the most beautiful butterfly you've ever seen. Do I want to swim the 200 fly? No, but boy do I love watching it. So, which stroke is the hardest? You tell me. If you want to learn how to swim all 4 strokes or just improve your technique and speed, download the MySwimPro app and start your very own personalized training plan. Also, check out the drill down video series on this channel for all the tips, tricks, and drills you need to improve your technique in all 4 strokes. I recommend starting with 2 ways to actually fix your freestyle pull. Thanks for watching.